We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. I'm Alex Kirshner here with Richard Johnson, Stephen Godfrey, out on business this week. Richard Johnson, my name is not in the portal yet, unless it's the portal to a better world. Are you in the portal?
How are you getting to that better world is the...
Just by being active in my community.
Okay, all right. Being a productive member of society, you mean?
Yeah. I feel like we're always in the transfer portal to a better world. That's the American project, week after week.
I wonder about some people's version of the portal versus others.
Richard, this week, for our wise, attractive, intelligent subscribers at splitzoneduo.com, we want to go over some hires that have been made in the past couple of weeks, really the past couple of days in the coach carousel. You and Godfrey have done a lot of Eyes List episodes of late where you've talked about why things are happening, how the machinations are kind of shaping up across the carousel landscape. Here we want to talk about hires that are done and dusted, what we think of them, where we think we're going next. Sound good to you?
Indeed.
I begin not far from your hometown of Gainesville, Florida, with the UCF Knights. I don't think that we got to this one in any real detail on an Eyes List episode yet, but you've probably heard by now. Scott Frost is the coach of UCF again. This is an interesting one because it's not only a retread hire, but it's a repeat hire. And he was so good there that it doesn't even feel quite fair to call it a retread hire in the way that you would think of, like, you know, old coach kind of takes a demotion and goes home. And also UCF is different than it was when Scott Frost was there. Start us off. What do you make of Scott Frost and UCF reuniting?
Did you see, I don't know. I think that there is going to be, I don't know, man. This is something that I'm really kind of struggling with because how much both sides of the coin are different here. Scott Frost is a different coach in person. UCF is a different program in a different league, all that sort of there's so much different. It's not even like Mac Brown coming back home to pull like one last job kind of thing. Because Scott Frost is in the prime of his career as a head coach. And he's sort of already speed ran a coaching life in that took the G5 to prominence, went to the P5, his home, and then flamed out. Like he's already lived that coaching life, went and did he was with the Rams. He's been with the Rams as a consultant for the last year. And so this is fascinating that UCF would do this. I know that they at least inquired about Kalani Sitake. They at least inquired with Jamie Chadwell. This was not an all systems go Scott Frost thing. There were other folks involved here. But this one is, of the lower key ones, this is probably the most fascinating thing. Or the most fascinating hire of all of the not North Carolina, you know what I mean?
I would concur with that. I want to ask you this. Is UCF a better job now in the Big 12 than it was when Scott Frost left them as the best program in the group of five?
Yes, because they're in the Big 12. I don't buy... for UCF specifically, I think that, yes, being in the Big 12 puts them in a better spot. They certainly can compete in the Big 12. I don't want to sit here and act like they can't compete. They certainly had to change things within the program in order to compete, and they're trending towards that. It's not like they just went 2-10 in the Big 12. You know what I mean?
No.
And the Big 12, as we both know, can get you to a specific level of psychosis because you can go worst to first and first to worst. So you can talk yourself into being in the mix in the Big 12 any given year.
Richard, it's a funny coincidence that I think the last coach that I felt so similarly about was Matt Rule, who replaced Frost at Nebraska. But this is a situation where, even compared to when Frost got fired by Nebraska, this is just such a different landscape than the one where he was successful at UCF. And UCF itself is one of the most interesting NIL programs in the country right now. And I say interesting rather than good because I don't think that they are a particular power in that region. But UCF announced just a couple weeks ago, before Gus Malzahn even left to take the Florida State offensive coordinator job, or like around, I think within like a week or two of that, that they are full steam ahead for revenue sharing, right? Like they are literally doing away with their collective. They are essentially severing ties. They're being nice about it and preparing to bring everything in-house, which for a school like UCF is probably a good thing because, and I should say that the post-house settlement landscape in general is probably a good thing for them in that it's a playing field leveler and there aren't going to be that many schools in the Big 12 that are going to have massive marginal collective advantages. But this is all still just like so different than what Scott Frost was doing here in 2016, 2017, 18, that I'm not even sure that I'm not sure that his past run here is useful at all for explaining, like, can he win this job?
I actually tend to agree with that.
Like, at all. Like, it's as if it never happened as far as like, it's no different than if he had been an amazing G5 coach, again, to use the rule example at Temple.
Yeah.
To me, it tells us just as much. It says he can coach ball, but it doesn't mean he will at a high level.
I think Scott personally is a different person. And I don't even necessarily think he is a better or I'm not trying to make a value proposition about whether Scott Frost is a better or worse person than he was in 2018 when he left. I just think he's a different person. Like I bet he regrets taking the Nebraska job. And I don't know if he said it publicly. A friend of mine who's a UCF fan texted me, was like, it kind of sounds like Scott really took the job because I guess his father was in poor health. His father has since passed away, but his father was in poor health, and that was like where the Nebraska connection really came from. I think Tom Osborne also kind of talked him into the Nebraska. Also, it's the Nebraska job, and you were the head coach at UCF. Like, everybody understands the deal, why he took the job when he did. But I do think there is probably a significant amount of regret that Scott left and took that job. Then again, would he do it the same again if he had the chance again? Probably, because it's the Nebraska job and what Nebraska means to him. You know what I mean? But, hindsight's 2020, and we both know obviously what happened when he went to Nebraska and how poor that job that went. And so, how do you, as Scott Frost, use that experience to better yourself in this job? There's some off the field stuff that happened at Nebraska, frankly, that were reasons contributing to the fact that he is no longer the Nebraska head coach. So how do you handle that differently as a person back home? How do you, I don't know. This is there are a lot of fascinating layers in the mix here with Scott Frost back in this job.
I don't think that this is the off field that you're referring to, though feel free to elaborate. But I think that at Nebraska, the microscope was not very good to Scott Frost, even in things as basic as staff management. Like, it was one of the biggest stories in Lincoln for a year, multiple years, might have been 2 or 3, that Nebraska didn't have a special teams coordinator and that Frost had organized his staff a certain way and their special teams sucked. And you had newspapers in Lincoln asking about how he was organizing his 10 assistants and how he was building his organization. And obviously the biggest problem was that he wasn't doing it well enough. But I can totally buy, not because we've seen it before at UCF, but just because of how poorly it went at Nebraska and what I would imagine are some scars from that job, how he could be a guy who is better suited to be out of the fishbowl. And UCF has beat reporters. It's not a small podunk program that doesn't have fans. But it ain't the same thing.
Yeah,
it ain't the same thing.
And I
Nebraska
don't think anybody
is in terms of the intense local focus on it. Nebraska's
covered
in
like
the
a pro
elite
team.
tier.
Nebraska is covered like a pro team, and
It's
I
like the
mean that
Cowboys.
by heft of beat writers. Nebraska's that way. Tennessee's that way. Ohio State's that way. Anyway, you're not stepping out of school by there is no comparison as far as pressure. There just isn't. Keep in mind also that the administration is different at UCF than it was at when he was here the first. Terry Mohajir was not in this job. Terry Mohajir was at Kansas.
It was Danny
and
White.
that's the athletic director. It was Danny White. So
Now
UCF
Tennessee.
as an institution moves in a different way, which is before we even talk about what league it's in. So there's just your point about how much of the first time is instructive about the second time is really well taken, because I don't know if there is much besides offense go Burr. Do you see the first hire he made, Scott?
No. Maybe.
Mackenzie Milton.
Yes, I did say. I was going to bring this up. So there is a low. I didn't realize he was the first, although that's.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if he was the very first, but
it furthers this thing that I will point out and sort of put to you for evaluation. Is this? I don't know anything about Mackenzie Milton's coaching chops at all.
I have heard.
I'm sure that they hope
I have heard that he's a very, very bright young coach, irrespective of.
Yeah, happy to hear it. So he might do great in that job.
I have heard good things about Mackenzie Milton.
I hope for nothing but the best for him in coaching. He might be amazing. I'm not evaluating the hire at all, other than to say that you can't, and I'm not saying Scott's trying to do this, you're not going to be able to dine out forever on, remember this band that was together in 17 or 18? Like that, it will generate some cool camp headlines. But then, he better be a great coach and you better build a great staff. And I hope that he is. He may very well be. But different ball game. I am curious what you make of the UCF collective thing that I mentioned at the top of this segment. Like UCF just coming out and saying, I think they were the first program in the power conferences to do it. We are bringing everything in. The collective is not going to play an active role in our team building come next year. I don't think the Big 12 right now has any schools that are towering over the competition in the paying player space. But I wonder how UCF's going to fit into this as soon as next year.
I think it means that UCF's not going to do anything on top of the rev share.
That's what I would intuit as well.
And also, I want people to realize that not everybody is going to count $21.5 million the same way. Some schools are going to allocate and say, this is how much we gave in scholarship money, and that's going to count to our rev share cap. Not everybody is going to be giving $21.5 million in cold hard cash to its athlete because they're not equipped to do that. Some schools, guess which ones, are going to give $21.5 million to their athletes, 15, 16, or 17 of which are going to go to its football program, and then they're going to do NIL on top of that. Guess which ones? I don't think UCF's going to be one of those. And I think that's what this says.
No, I would agree that it just kind of by process of elimination, it seems like if you're sidelining the collective, it means that you see value in centralizing everything, and that is worth it to you to do it that way and not have the outside group helping. That could be good, could be not great.
The outside group might not be able to. By the way,
yeah,
it's not like UCF had a $12 million. If UCF's football team had a $12 million NIL budget. Keep that in mind as well.
Is it easier or harder for Scott Frost to acquire good players now than it was when they were in the American? On the one hand, easier. You're in the Big 12 now. On the other hand, it might have been a little bit easier to recruit relative to the league before anyone could pay players and when you were in Florida in the American Athletic. Remember, those UCF teams had a decided athletic advantage on their competition. Decided. I mean, remember Shaquem Griffin, the way that he would fly around the field? He's the first one who comes to mind. But there were a handful of them. They had good players on both sides. They had an NFL cornerback, whose name I forget, who was a really good ball player. They had a couple great wide receivers. So it might be a little harder for UCF to have the Jimmies and the Joes in the Big 12 for Frost the way they did in the American. I don't know. We'll see.